Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Well, tell me a little bit about Australia. I know that you're 12 hours behind, so this must be an early morning for you.
Yeah, it's still dark. It's actually still really dark this morning. I didn't expect it to be this dark. I do. I wake early, but I remain indoors and just engage in practice. So I don't often look outside, but I'm looking out. I'm actually looking outside now. It's still really really dark. So I've had to put these like photo lights on. So just otherwise we wouldn't be able to see each other.
So you're really waking up to some lights.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's very bright.
What's the weather like there this time of the
It's
year?
winter here. It's winter here, so it's cold. Oh, it's cold for Perth standards, for Western Australian standards. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in Florida here, it is definitely hot and humid. We're the nitty gritty of our hot
No,
season.
not humid here. We're dry heat here. When it gets warm, but it's dry heat. It's a different heat. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we'll wait a few minutes for a few other people to join us. But it sounds like you've been doing a lot of traveling from what I've been seeing from your posts.
Yes, yeah, which has been really fun, but also a little bit tiring as well. So it's lovely to be grounded for a few weeks before I'm off again. I'll be in the US later on in the year, and I'll be in Europe in a couple of weeks, and I'll remain there for a couple of months, and then move to the west coast of the US for some time, and then back down this way in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Sounds like you're really living the life over there, Steph.
Uh, yeah, well, the traveling is not traveling is lovely. It's just to get to a place, of course, to fulfill a particular desire or meet with people or whatever that may be. But it can be a little bit taxing as well. So it's really, I suppose, being grounded is, wherever you feel grounded, it's a perception, it's an integration into self. But I do love Fremantle where I live. I do love my home. I consider this my home here, and I'm always very very happy to come back to this place. Yeah, it's amazing to be here. Winter, summer, it doesn't matter for me. It's beautiful here. I love it.
Very nice. Well, Australia's on my places that I would like to visit one of these days.
Yeah, yeah, it is an amazing place. It's a vast country. It's a vast land. There's a great, similar to the US in terms of aesthetic natural diversity. There's a great deal of diversity here. Our coastlines are amazing, and there's something to be said for the environment, for immersing ourselves in an environment that facilitates our well-being. And the west coast and even the east coast of Australia really does that. We have some beautiful landscape, and the energy is amazing, and yeah, the connectedness is amazing. Our oceans here, if you like oceans, they're amazing here. Yeah, our beaches are amazing.
Very
It's an
nice.
understatement.
Well, hopefully I'll get there one of these days. But it's been I'm so glad that you're joining me tonight. Been looking forward to talking with you to
That's
start and
nice.
kind of share with our viewers how you and I have been connected. Is you
Mm,
are a TV correspondent for Manila Up, and I'm a contributor
mm,
to the Dear Janie column, and our
mm,
dear friend Melanie
mm,
Garcia has
mm.
connected us. So we're looking forward to this conversation. It would probably really help some of the viewers when I read your bio and just some of the things that you've done as far as your passions and your mission and your title of a relational alchemist. I was curious to find out from you what exactly is a relational alchemist, and how did you come up with that to represent who you are?
Yeah, this is interesting. So I've gone through some, I think we all go through uh, identity changes throughout our lives in various capacities through the layers of self that we are. And I was just at a point, how long, I'm not sure how long ago it was now, maybe a year or so ago, give or take, circa a year ago. And I was just at a point where I was going through really clarifying my service to humanity, my service to the world, and what it is I really want to focus on, whether it be something broad or more niched, more narrow, whatever it may be. But I had clarity on that, but I didn't know how to express that in a way. And there's a balancing act. It's helping people understand, what it is that you do and what you represent and what you are in the world so that they can relate to you, but also not making it too abstract, but then being true to yourself. And there's this balancing act. And the way I came up with the term, I was literally just driving in my car from one place to another. and it just came into my head. It came into my mind. So
Just drive the car down the road.
yeah, basically, yeah. And I said, this is it. This fits what I represent. This fits the journey that I've been through myself, and what I impart now around that journey. And relational alchemy is essentially an opportunity for us to transform relationships that don't serve us, that we don't align with, that we don't resonate with, into relationships that we do resonate with. And that's our relationships to ourselves. So our relationship to self and all the facets and layers of self. Our relationship to ideas, to purpose, to our vocation, to our mission, to what's important to us, to people, to our beloved or to our romantic, intimate partnerships. That's an important one. Our familial relationships, our platonic relationships, basically anything and everything that we have a relationship to. Can we create a clear conduit of understanding and connection to that thing or that person that we are relating to really enhance that entire situation and the well-being and the wellness that we experience internally and also externally, how we communicate, how we express, how we connect, and so forth.
Well, you definitely said a mouthful. So we are looking forward to diving into this conversation and reading your post. You articulate masculinity and femininity and just energies very well. So as we are having this organic conversation, this is to our viewers, you feel free to chime in, ask questions, make some comments, and we will respond to them as we go along. Hi, Dr. Candace. Dr. Candace is a local pediatrician here and a few others who are joining us. This is a topic that has really been at the top of my interest list in particular, Stef. What I'm hearing and what I'm seeing, not only because I'm a licensed psychotherapist here in Florida, own a full service counseling center, and there are 10 of us. We all specialize in different areas. But in particular, I run a group called Women Redeem. We have a retreat later this year, as well as a conference that we're hoping to have next year. So my goal is to really help women have healthy relationships, in particular with the opposite sex. So one of the things that I've been seeing is kind of this new breed of female that has been birthed, so to speak. Since the sexual revolution, we've been building our self-esteem, and we've just been evolving in politics and career and education and just having power, all of those types of things. But when it comes to relational dynamics, the type of women, there's two that I see when I think of an alpha female. One is an overall alpha female that's just part of her personality and who she is. And then the other alpha female that I will see is situational. Well, she may be very alpha in her job or an entrepreneur, but in her relationship, she can be more of a beta to her spouse. So those are the two main categories that I'll see. But in particular, I'm interested in having the conversation about the alpha female that I will see that is very dominant and has a certain mentality of, I don't need a man, which can certainly send a certain type of negative connotation to her in particular. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts just overall about alpha female, and what does that look like in today's society in particular? I'm not talking about the leader of the pack type alpha female, even though that's included, just a different breed of alpha females that we're seeing today.
What a massive question. I love it. I love the enormity of that question. So here it is. For me, life is about contrast, and we often ignore the contrast in life. And this is a disservice to our own humanity, to our own expression, to the way we have a capacity to consciously communicate and connect with each other. There's nothing, I want to be very clear about something. There's nothing intrinsically wrong or right about alpha males, alpha females, beta females. We make choices based on our perceived needs and who we are. We'll make choices on a myriad of circumstances, of course, and reasons. But essentially, we require contrast. So, for example, if we have, whether you want to call it a situational alpha female or an alpha female that is alpha or dominant in all areas of her life, matching her with an alpha male is going to be a real struggle. Or depending on her sexual orientation, another alpha female. Again, that's irrelevant. I'll use heterosexual examples just because that's the status quo, the majority, and just for simplicity's sake as well. But to be very clear too, I want to masculine and feminine energies, expressive states of being reside within every human being. They're just a contrasted energy. So we can replace masculine energy with go energy or do energy, and we can replace feminine energy with flow energy or be energy. Okay, so today they're interchangeable terms. But masculine and feminine, I think most people are familiar with, and there's characteristics that are associated with that, and then expressive states that come out. My overall feel on alpha females is neutral and objective. It sort of is what it is. It's about adjusting and adapting to what we want as individuals and having clarity and discernment on what we want in our integrated selves, and then attracting that, and then knowing what is right for us and what is not in alignment with us, essentially, when we're talking about intimate relationships. So if you know you're an alpha male, and this is the thing though, this is the really interesting thing about relationships. Have you ever asked anyone to list their perfect partner or their perfect imperfect partner? There was no one's perfect, okay, or imperfectly perfect partner, whatever term you want to use. You'll find that the vast majority of people will apply or project characteristics to their partner, irrespective of their sexual orientation, that are basically themselves. It's essentially they want to date or they want to be with themselves. So examples of this is, I would love my partner to love animals. I want them to be compassionate. I want them to be driven. I want them to be purposeful. These are either character traits that we hold within us and they're quite strong within us, or they're quite strong in our scope of wanting to have these traits within us, within our own selves. So we project a lot. So initially, alpha males or alpha females may be very attracted to, and I hope I'm not going on a tangent here, so let me just stop me if you feel I am. Alpha females may initially be very, very attracted to an alpha male, but that down the line won't work unless a polarity or a contrast comes into play where there's a balance between those two energies. Because otherwise there's just this collision going on, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because that's not how we are as beings. We need that balance. We need that contrast. We need that polarity, so to speak. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with any posturing. Well, there are some extreme cases, of course, where there is, right, where we can say morally there's wrong action or wrong posturing. But essentially, people have a choice to be who they want to be, but they have to connect to themselves and be very certain that that's the posture they want to portray in the world. That's who they really want to be. Or are they being that because there's externalized values being pushed upon them? There's pressure being placed upon them, and they're taking on those value sets or those characteristics or those expressive postures that aren't really their own.
So then what would you say, and if there's any alpha females, or if you would consider yourself an alpha female and you are listening to this conversation, please chime in, make some comments, or share your experiences. We would love to hear from you directly. So I'm wondering, Stef, what I will tend to hear is this old argument, so to speak, about men being intimidated by alpha females, or some women will say to me that men are just intimidated by me. I'm talking about alpha females in general. Men are just intimidated by me because I don't need them to pay my bills. As we hear the Beyonce song, I can pay my own bills and be able to live my own life. And they will kind of take on that thought process that they're not in relationship, or they don't have healthy relationship in particular with men because they're intimidated because I'm alpha and I don't need them. I'm wondering, what are some of your thoughts when you hear that argument?
So I'll respond to that in this way. And it depends what line of thought or belief system that one follows. But there's an interesting point around that. So, have you ever heard a man, or do you often hear men say that? You often hear men say, I don't need or want a woman to pay my bills or look after me in that way, or do this or provide safety. So you often don't hear that, right?
That is not the norm.
Yeah. So men are in that masculine energy. Again, masculine is not limited to men or women. It's gender neutral. It's irrelevant. It's just an energy and it's an expressive state. This is where we get confused sometimes. We think masculine, we immediately associate that with males. And yes, that's the case. I mean, authors and thought leaders in this space, such as David Data, may say that males will generally hold healthy males will generally hold a 60 to 80% masculine energy, and the remainder is feminine. And the same is true for females. 60 to 80% feminine energy, and the remainder is masculine. The issue, again, there's nothing wrong with a woman saying that, but she won't necessarily then attract a man that holds that disposition within himself to want to be that man or be that person in the world. So there are some men that are intimidated by alpha males. There are also men that are not intimidated by alpha males, by alpha females, sorry. So it's, again, what do people want? You know, and when an alpha woman says, I don't want a man or need a man, where's that coming from? Is it coming from a place of fear? Is it coming from a place of conditioning? Or is it coming from a place of authentic truth? But there's nothing wrong with someone not wanting to be in a romantic, intimate relationship or not wanting to rely on other people. But there's a but there. We're relational, and this is for men as well. We're relational social beings. That is, we are pro-social beings. We've evolved that way, physiologically, culturally, socially. So to say we don't need other people is a fallacy, and it's not true. In what capacity we need those people? Well, that's an individual choice as well. And it's also predicated upon our social conditions, to our socioeconomic, sociocultural, geopolitical conditions. We're a very different place where we were 1 million years ago and 2 million years ago. So evolutionary theory and the psychological development of evolutionary theory, it plays a role, but it's not the whole story either, because we're not where we were 1 million years ago, 500,000 years ago, 1.5 million years ago. We've evolved consciously in very different ways, cognitively, emotionally, etc. The way we interact with each other are far more complex and layered than we used to be. So this is a very complex conversation. I know you know this. But again, it comes down to, why do we have to limit people? Why do we have to put people, I know why we have to put people in boxes. It helps us be more efficient in our learning and understanding. But why must we say, okay, you're wrong because you don't want to be with a man and you're an alpha woman in a world where you shouldn't be an alpha woman? Why? Like, that's not necessary. However, if that individual is projecting a particular expressive state and posture in the world, yet internally they want something different, then they're being inauthentic and out of integrity, and they're suffering for that. And that's an individual choice. That person has to come into that through exploring their own selves.
And that's a great perspective. And I want to just read Dr. Candace Jones' comment. She's a board pediatrician, successful pediatrician in Orlando. And she says, my husband and I work well because we balance each other, and she's alpha. He's cool, calm, and collected, and he's not intimidated by her at all. But you made an interesting point earlier, and that is, where is that coming from? Because sometimes what we'll see in particular is that if we look at the context of which that statement would come from a female in particular, in certain cases, not always, is that where have they been in relationship? Have they been in a position where they've had a toxic, unhealthy relationship where they had to become alpha and had to make more decisions and had to kind of get driven in that direction because of relational dynamics? And if they're not necessarily healed, what we can see is that torch is used in a very negative, aggressive way, which sometimes can turn men off if someone's being aggressive in that sense that I don't need a man. But if we look at the context, it's coming from a place of hurt because of their experiences, which obviously, to your point, they have to find that within themselves. And there's a healing that has to take place, in my opinion, regardless of your position of masculinity or femininity. In order to be in a relationship with the other, you have to be secure in who you are. So you're showing up as a whole person and not looking at that other person to take care of you. And we have another comment from Monique. I think the alpha males that she's encountered feels that they're leading over being the aloha dog and is automatic. They forget that everything is still a process. You have to still earn your place as this alpha male in an alpha female's life. Good point, Monique. You know, and the other thing I would also say is the comments that I'll get from women, Stef, is that if we look at a certain, let's say, biblical terms, if someone's coming from a Christianity perspective, an alpha female or even a beta female have a certain image in their head of what a man should be. And I always think about the 3 Ps. He should be the provider, he should be the protector, and he should plan, so to speak. And I'm using those terms very broad. But then if they're coming from that hurt place, but yet they still have this particular standard, to your point, there may not necessarily be a foundation for a healthy relationship. So coming from the space and the men that you see and work with and you speak to large audiences, what is your definition, or what should be a working definition in a general term of masculinity, to your point, being gender neutral?
First and foremost, men in today's context need to define masculinity for themselves. And this is part of the problem of expressed masculinity in today's world, is that many men think that they're alpha males and they have no fucking idea what they actually are. And they're expressing themselves in very unhealthy ways. So the journey of exploration and being very conscious and having intention with respect to how they define their own masculinity is quite liberating in that sense. And it provides men an opportunity to gain deeper perspective into who they truly are. There's various expressions, shades and layers of masculinity and femininity as well, and both within men and women, and any gender type that you associate with, or that you as you define yourself. Defining healthy masculinity can be complex for people because it requires men to journey deeply into self. For me personally, healthy masculinity includes characteristics and postures of inclusivity, balancing selfishness and selflessness. So I call that selfish selflessness or enlightened self-interest. Being more centered and grounded, being able to consciously communicate. In other words, you can still be an alpha male and have healthy dominance in your social hierarchy as well. Being open, being sustainable in thinking, so long-term in our thinking and our feeling. These are some characteristics that define, for me, healthy masculinity. Being able to nurture, being able to be emotionally literate, emotionally fit, emotionally intelligent. Having this centeredness in self where we're able to be logical, but we're also able to lead from the heart. So we're asking very deep questions about who we are as men and who we are as people in society today. Again, that's a combination of being inclusive in our thought paradigms, being sustainable and long-term in our thinking, not being short-term in our thinking. Having a capacity to protect ourselves, but to do that in an intelligent way relevant to culture. Now, no, I was going to mention something, but I won't because that's a rabbit hole. Probably don't want to go down. Sorry, I think on the fly sometimes. But that in as a broad sense, that's one some characteristics that I would define how I would define healthy masculinity as well. And just to mention something as well, Janie, which I think is really important. There are various schools of thoughts about alpha females. Alpha females have been in our society from virtually the beginning of time. It's something that we've evolved with, alpha females, alpha males, etc. But within our social circles per se, because alpha females essentially make it easier for groups of women and groups of people to share, cooperate, create companionship, connect, and so forth. Because again, it's a leadership role within a subgroup or a group of people. Now, how that plays out is very much dependent on the cultural influence of that time. So we have to understand where we are as a humanity now and also where we've come from. Well, we've come from toxic or unhealthy oppressive practices. We've come from patriarchy. We still live in a patriarchal society, and there's less balance. So what you just look to society. What's happening is that, and you look at the various waves of feminism as well, is that there's a revolt against that because it's not natural to actually be in extremity in any capacity. It's just that 1 million years ago, 500,000 years ago, which we know very little of, essentially. We know what we know, which is most of it's assuming, but we didn't have the complex conscious structures and understanding of the world that we have today, the emotional integration, the connectedness, the vast connectivity that we have today, 7.5 billion people and so forth. So what we're doing is we're noticing this extreme expression in society, and we're saying, no, this doesn't work. Like, we have to have balance. So what will generally happen when that pendulum is swinging, it will swing one way and it will swing the other way very hard and then come into balance at some point. What we do in society, unfortunately, is that we keep doing this. we keep swinging, and we're not finding that balance. But we will eventually. We will recognize it, remember it again eventually.
Good point. Another comment. Tiana says, I believe truly confident men would find confident women to be very attractive, not intimidating. I believe women can be both strong and gentle at the same time. It's a great point, Tiana. One of the things that I'll hear more times than not from women, Stef, here in America, in Florida, is that we are seeing a wave of, when we're talking about extremities and feminine energy versus masculine energy, that they're seeing a lot more men taking on traditional feminine traits. And I'm wondering what
Beta males.
your thoughts about that, because we hear that comment a lot of times, and in feminine circles, if we're just having a real conversation in this moment, people are often wondering, are they on the down low? Do they swing the other side when they see the feminine traits and the feminine characteristics? And, there's certain cities that are known for men in the United States being on the down low. So there's a lot of women that when they see those feminine traits can be a little bit curious as to what that's about. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about men that have more typical feminine traits.
So again, there's some school of thoughts that would call those types of men beta males. It depends on their disposition as well and how they act and move through the world. A beta male will generally attract, and I'll revert back to what I said about that pendulum swinging, yeah? But a beta male will generally attract an alpha female and vice versa. So alpha females will generally be quite comfortable with beta males. Why? Because the alpha female is the general traits of an alpha female are that task orientation. They're emotionally self-sufficient. They're goal-orientated. They dominate in social circles. They're direct. They have a focused position in their social class. These are some characteristics of an alpha female. But when we look at those characteristics, they're very similar to an alpha male, right? They're just alpha characteristics. So for that woman, because we're talking about alpha females, for that female to be with another man, to be complementary and to have longevity in the relationship, she'll generally have to be with a beta male, someone that complements those characteristics. Again, it's not wrong or right. It's just a disposition. What some would say as well, and I'm on the cusp with this. I'm not too sure. I know that as males though, and as females, we have. Our brains are different. Physiologically, we are different. Our reproductive systems are different. Our sexual systems are different. I mean, the vast connections that women have from the brain to their own sexual organs is so complex compared to males. The different areas of the brain that function and light up when we're connecting, communicating, when we're being in the world are different to some extent. Whilst there's a great deal of sameness in who we are as people, and we unify through that. We also unify through our differences. Again, it's that complementary opposites. Yeah. So, back to your question. Some would say, and again, that we're being untrue to ourselves from a hormonal perspective as men if we become over feminized, because we're males, we're men. And so we have to take our biology and our hormone production and our balance of hormones into consideration. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't be emotional. That doesn't mean that emotions are reserved for women only. So we don't have a limbic system. Of course we have a limbic system. Of course we feel. And there's appropriate times to express that. And that's for any human being. And again, this goes back to the ancient structures within the ancient physiological structures within our being, within our bodies, that tell us don't behave in this way in this particular situation because you put your life at risk. Don't express this way or don't act or move this way because you will put your life at risk. And we are self-preserving machines, essentially. Our brain is about self-preserving itself. So is the ego. So is the psychic structures we have. It's about self-preservation and survival and safety. So being a beta male in today's world, again, I'll use an extreme example and it could work back. Really being over feminized as a man, you're not going to attract a feminine woman. A feminine heterosexual woman does not want to have sex with another woman. A heterosexual man does not want to have sex with another man. So a man that understands himself and who he is and is in his healthy masculine does not want to have sex or does not want to be intimate with another man if he's heterosexual. So again, there's this balancing act that we just have to get clear on who we are and what we want. That's really what it comes down to. There's no wrong and right in all of this. It's what do you want? Do you really know yourself and the layers of self? And what is it that you want in life, in terms of your relationships, in terms of how you want to express, in terms of how you want to be in the world? When we get clarity on that, then we can begin to attract the circumstances and the people and the various positions that allow us and that match our response to that, if that makes any sense.
It makes a lot of sense, Stef, and I actually appreciate the way that you eloquently put that, coming from a male, as far as the different energies, and that women do not want to sleep with other women, so essentially.
Heterosexual women, yeah.
Right, we're talking about heterosexual women. But the other part of that is I want to make sure that I reiterate that just because the male has feminine beta energy doesn't necessarily mean that he's what in our state's term is on the down low, that he is hiding his sexuality.
Absolutely, and it could be because he has been emasculated as a young child. It could be because he's grown up in an environment that is hyper feminized, and that's how he then moves through the world. Because we're a combination of nature, nurture, and that doesn't mean that he has no heterosexual tendencies or that he has homosexual tendencies. It means that he just projects himself in this way. But then he will attract that match in his world. Now, if that doesn't resonate with him as an individual, he then needs to make transformations in his expression, in his being, to align with what he truly wants and not be dictated to by unconscious conditioning. And that's a choice that we have to make as individuals, as people. And it's not easy, because it's like, how do you distinguish and divide between what society is telling us to be, or familial values and expectations and education systems and all that stuff, with respect to what we actually truly want? And we are a combination of all that. But then deciphering that and articulating that and narrowing that and then expressing that and being that in the world, it's a process and a journey. And, I strip all of these labels, and categories are beautiful, and they help us make sense of the world. The brain does it very well. It compartmentalizes very well. But it's a journey that's not necessarily easy, requires effort. And most people, we live in a again, condition. We live in a fairly lazy society. Lazy means that we want things to be easy. Again, a polarized view of this world, of reality. It's easy is good and easy is healthy, but challenge is also healthy as well. Difficulty is also healthy as well. That's the cusp on where we grow and we break through. We break down ourselves to break through and eventually create a new sense of self, and that is more aligned with our authentic being, what we truly desire. So it requires a process. We have to put some effort into this.
And I appreciate that. It's a process. We're all on a journey. Sometimes we have the breakdown before we have the breakthrough. So I'm going to read a few comments and see if anyone has any questions for Stef. Now's the time to write those in. I see that, let's see, Monique says, in my experience with other alpha females, when they state, I don't need a man, it is coming from a different generation of when women were completely taken care of and dependent on a man. Times have changed, and as women and men evolve, granted a man's role has not changed, how and why women now dependent and need a man has changed drastically. Great comment there. And Dawn is asking you if you can respond to, as a man, why are men sometimes are intimidated by successful women? No, we talked about that a little bit. Did you have any comments that you would want to share about that in your experience, or what you hear of other men?
So from a collective perspective, it threatens the power status quo. It affects the norm. So we're accustomed to men being in power, whether it be cultural power, familial power, social power, individual power. We're accustomed in our society to men being in power. So seeing these dominant alpha females, and again, because of technology, because of globalization, we see it more and more. Thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, not that long ago, we were quite isolated in our communities. We saw what we saw, and it was a number of few people. Now we see essentially billions of people. We have access to that, and we see what is happening. And there's change occurring. And it's as a collective, men, especially unhealthy men, because they're not confident in their own selves. Men that are dominating and men that are unhealthily. Men that unhealthily dominate and that are subjugating and prejudice in their actions and harshly judgmental, critiquing and divisive. They're men that are in their unhealthy masculine selves.
Mhm.
And there's tremendous weakness in that, tremendous weakness in that. And when that is threatened, but that's a status quo as well. You know, that subjugation, that ostracization, that oppression, that's the status quo in our society. We have to get very clear on that. It's changing, yes, but it's still the norm. So when the norm is threatened, the masses, or the dominant social hierarchy, which aren't actually the masses, they're a minority group. It's white, middle class males, essentially. And this is a very complex conversation too, because it feeds into not just gender dynamics, but also race dynamics and a myriad of other factors.
Absolutely.
But when that is threatened, men particularly, because of their biology as well, they will react as opposed to respond. And generally the reaction will be violent. And whether it's physical violence or emotional violence or social oppression or whatever it may be, it's a violent act. It's an extreme act. So that's how the dominant hierarchy, and other men wouldn't like to hear this. So other men, like I have conversations with other men, and like other men get very aggressive with me, and I find that very interesting because my background is very diverse. I've come from very unhealthy masculine dynamics. I've come from violence, and I've come from subjugation and oppression, and I've been that, and that's been done to me as well. So I see life from a very interesting perspective. So I laugh loudly when other men attempt to oppress, because I'm expressing what's essentially equity-based principles. I really believe in that. I believe in that equity, and I believe that we're evolving as a species. But those men that are really stuck in that old paradigm are very, very resistant, and they still hold a lot of power in this world. So it's going to be met with difficulty and challenge. That's for sure. I hope I've responded to that question. I took it from a collective perspective as opposed to an individual perspective. Yeah.
Yep. So Dawn has a comment. I think this is probably a good segue to talk a little bit about relationships. That as society, we are grooming our young girls to be more alpha with our expectations as parents, teachers, etc. And where are we headed in relationships? So when you think about, when we look back from all the way the sexual revolution to all the traditions, as you mentioned, there's always been alpha females, but traditionally the alpha role has been male and the beta role has been female. And with all the things that have been changed societal wise, what are your thoughts about how does this upset or deal or change the dynamics of traditional heterosexual relationships in particular?
It's a great question. Yeah, the unknown is just unfamiliar, and it's scary. And again, so I revert back to what I just said a moment ago about that backlash. There's a backlash because it's unknown. It's unknown whilst alpha females have been a part of our society from the break of dawn, in a wider social context, not so much, more within female circles when we're looking at that alpha femininity or that alpha female. So again, it's very new. It's very new to our society to see this. So we're grooming something very different, and I don't know if that's healthy, because we're moving to, again, it's an extreme. So are we going too extreme with this? Because it's like that old adage: two wrongs don't make a right. Two extremes don't bring it into balance. They do, but not in the immediate sense. They'll remain here, and they'll just fight and struggle here until the fight ceases, the resistance ceases, and we find a balance, and we find a new way. We realize there's another way to be without feeling threatened and still feeling safe. We can still be ourselves and express authenticity. So I don't know that grooming, but it's a revolt. I get it as well. Like, I get why it's occurring. It's very natural. Like, if I was feeling oppressed, I know exactly what I'll do. Me being me, I'd fight. Like, I'd be smart with how I fight, but I'd fight. Mm-hmm. So it's natural human behavior. When we feel oppressed, whether it's socially, culturally, individually, emotionally, psychologically, relationally, whatever, we want to fight. We want to bring back that homeostasis. What it does for our relationships, our intimate relationships, I think it's going, unless you really know yourself and you have clarity on who you are and you understand these dynamics, which are not taught in school. I've learned mine the very, very hard way, the very difficult way, and I'm still learning, of course. I'm deeply learning. I'm learning now as we speak, as I'm speaking, as I'm listening to the question, I'm listening to you. I'm learning so much. It doesn't stop. it's going to be challenging for relationships. That's a given. That's it. Because again, like, people don't want to give up their power, and they become scared to give up their power. And until you can fully surrender to death, and whether that be physical death, whether that be the death of ego, the death of an idea, the death of entrenched belief systems, and you have to know them first. So it's a process of knowing self.
And I
There's
think
going to be friction.
there's a great point, and it goes back to, especially regardless of society, is knowing ourself and spending time with ourselves and knowing who we are, because then we know what we need. And you mentioned homeostasis, because there's a question here. First, Mary says, I think all needs have changed, but fundamentally women still need men. Appreciate the comment. And then Tori is asking, what do you feel is the origin of this issue? You kind of started talking a little bit about that when you talk about balance.
Yeah, so look, every gender has their own hierarchy, and this is an integrated, like, this is integrated in cross genders, and we really don't know how to work this out as yet. There's so much that we're working out as we're going. Like, when we're looking at the origins of, we're looking at the origins of this disparity. Like, essentially, for me, it comes down to extremism. Like, we've been in an extreme patriarchal society for some time. And it's not working for the level of consciousness that we're moving through and reaching. Like, the extremism just doesn't work. It's unhealthy, because it's not balanced. There's no harmony there. And it's not an expression or an embodiment of harmony. So the origin of that is coming from, historically, too many subgroups within society and groups within society being oppressed, and not being given a voice, and not being given equity. Equality is one thing, but equity, not being given equity in society and in individual expression as well. So I feel that's where it's probably coming from, as a blanket statement, of course, just to simplify it for time's sake. But you know, there's so many changes occurring right now with men and women, and even I believe that I saw not long ago that I think Facebook has 67 different gender identification types that you can identify yourself as. So we've gone beyond binary gender now as well, at least to some extent. And again, that's another conversation altogether. But the point that I'm making is that we're moving through rapid change, and identifying the origins definitely helps, and having an idea of that, but also getting clarity on where we want to be and where we want to go. And we have an opportunity to redefine our intimate relationships, redefine who we are as men and women, as people, as human beings, as sentient beings, conscious sentient beings, walking this earth, and what that means for us. And I don't know if that's going to be easy. I don't necessarily think it will be. There'll be a lot of clashing. Like, when I say we, if our communities and societies are breeding alpha females, because there's a perceived need to protect oneself, then there will be clashes, because there are a lot of unhealthy alpha males out there. Many unhealthy alpha males, and dominant in society. So there'll be a lot of this.
Yes. So if there's any other questions, please keep chiming in. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are, because this is a really relevant topic as we get a little bit deeper into relationships, and we talk about sex when we're looking at feminine energy and masculine energy, in particular the alpha female sexually. So sometimes what I'll hear, if I'm work with many thousands of couples over the years, been in practice over 11 years. And one of the things I'll in particular hear from alpha females, and most of the time it's coming from an unhealthy space, and I know that, but what they'll say is that they don't like to have sex with someone that feels like a boy. So even though they may be sexually very expressive, that in their careers and in life, they could be alpha, they can make decisions, and they can move forward with feeling confident in their alphaness. But when it comes to sexuality, more times than not, I still hear women want men who have the penis to take charge and to be more of the alpha in the bedroom. So I know that you've had some postings recently around sexuality and these energies. I'm wondering if you can comment on that for us.
Yeah, sure. So let's look at that broadly for a moment, and deeply as well. What is that tapping into? What aspect of the collective psyche is that tapping into? What aspect of gender consciousness is that tapping into? It's tapping into, we're talking about nature and nurture, elements of nurture in the way we present ourselves, and elements of nature. And what it's tapping into, for me, I see that as from an evolutionary perspective, a biological perspective, physiological perspective, is that hormonally and sexually, that woman wants to play her natural role in something that is ancient to us, is how we are here, is sex, is sexuality, is sexual consummation. So that's very, very interesting. But the problem with that is, and you mentioned this earlier around selective alphaness or selective alpha females, so they can be alpha female in society or in their work or in the corporate world or in some form of socio-cultural expression, but in the family life they become beta, and what that means. And I'm not saying that's the perfect ideal in any capacity. I really don't know, to be honest with you. But if you're getting regularly women coming to you saying, I want a man, essentially saying, I want an alpha man in the bedroom, it's saying something about their psyche, it's saying something about the collective psyche as well, if there's a large representation of that occurring. But it's also saying something about the balance too. And the reality, or the puzzle to be solved here, and the sticking point for women in that space, is they have to be able to, because remember, alpha is just, alpha traits are alpha traits, whether they're in females or males. When they're in females, it's just a little bit, in society at large, just a little bit unfamiliar to us. So we're like, whoa, that's, you're too much of a man, go away. Because we're just unfamiliar with it. And we're saying, oh, you're too much of a man. But essentially what we're saying is that you're holding characteristics that I, in my mind, associate with being a man. So therefore you're scaring me because I'm seeing a woman, but you're acting like a man. I'm all confused. That's essentially what's happening. But that also happens in, like, how does a woman then attract a man that is alpha in the bedroom but beta in her life, or does she just have casual physical sex and it's only that, and there's no emotional intimacy outside of the bedroom? It's complex, but again, it's what does that woman want, and where can she soften, or where can she not harden, but where can she I'm just mindful of using these terms beta and alpha as well, because it's more than just that. But where can that woman be authentic to her own physiology and her needs, and also then be authentic in society as well, without forcing herself to be someone that she's not? And again, I'm not saying that being an alpha male, an alpha female is being forced, not at all, because it's something that's very natural to us. It's how and where it's expressed. And if you're not satisfying your needs as an alpha female, and some of those needs are emotional and sexual, physical intimacy and connection, then it's for you as an individual to look at yourself and say, well, where can I make some changes in my life to bring in exactly what I want and what I feel I need?
So when you think about just that whole concept of alpha female and where we're going, because it is a complex conversation and many different factors come into play, which is why I had distinguished an overall alpha female to an alpha female related to career and just situations. But when you think about where we're going, and we're talking about sexuality and sex with beta and alpha, what would be your advice to someone who is perceived as an alpha female, but still has a desire to be with a traditional alpha male? Because I do believe, and you've mentioned this earlier today, that a number one mistake that alpha females will make in dating is that they will look for an alpha male, but there will be some friction, and those two positions in the same space, it will be a lot more difficult to make them work. So alpha females who are true alpha females, not just situational alpha females, to your point, really need to move towards a beta male. But beta males, so to speak, have such a negative connotation because we think of femininity or weak and those types of things. So what would be some of your advice to an overall alpha female who's confident, not aggressive and dominant, but that is her position and that's who she's accepted herself to be in the dating world?
Get clear on who you are and communicate that. Find yourself a healthy alpha male. If that's what you want, find yourself a healthy alpha male and communicate that. Talk to each other, express to each other what it is that you both need. And come from a place of collaboration, come from a place of conscious, open communication. Decide, this is the role that I'm going to lead this area of our life, our lives. You're going to lead that area of our lives. Are you okay with that? Yep, sure. Okay, great. Let's move on. Next area. Literally have these conversations. Literally, and also allow it to organically unfold, but maybe make a commitment on how to discuss or how to argue. Make a commitment on how are we going to argue or how are we going to disagree? How are we going to understand ourselves? How are we going to approach this? And it's a framework, and then you can allow it to organically unfold. Or if you want to be in a great deal of control, you can go into great detail with respect to, okay, this is how we're going to be in the bedroom. This is me. This is how we're going to be in society. Or this is how we're going to be in this dynamic, and have that open communication. You don't need to let go of anything that you are if you don't want to. But observe it, explore it, because maybe it doesn't serve you, but maybe it does. And gain clarity on that, and have that. Be flexible. Don't be rigid in your beliefs and your movement. When we are rigid, doesn't matter whether we're alpha, beta, gamma, omega. It's irrelevant. When we're rigid in our frameworks, we limit ourselves. Full stop. So it's about being flexible. You can still have alpha traits, and who you are in the bedroom, or who you are sexually or intimately with your partner, that can be different too. We don't have to paint ourselves with the same brush in every area of life. It doesn't have to be like that. So my advice is communicate and connect. Be very, very open. And that requires a great deal of courage, but it shouldn't be a problem if you're an alpha.
There we go. So we have about 10 minutes left. Thanks, Stef, for the comments. So if you have any comments or you have any questions for Stef in our remaining time, please chime in. So, one of the questions that I have for you, how do we still, and it's a broad question, but how do we still maintain the change of the female role? Had the last Facebook Live a couple of weeks ago about dating after the Me Too movement. We continuously are evolving in societal ways. How do we maintain and still respect the alpha male with the rise of the alpha female? In your perspective, what would be a healthy balance of that? Not necessarily relational wise, but just societal wise, that we can still see the alpha male as a positive thing and not as necessarily as a negative, aggressive, violent person, where the alpha female can still have her space in society as well. And I'm looking at it from a healthy framework for the sake of this question.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. It's about cooperation, and it's about realization as well, and actualization. It's about transcending old societal, collective, and individual patterns as well. And it's about really looking at ourselves as whole people and whole communities and saying, is this what we really want? Do we want this segregation and division to continue? Do we want to continue to isolate ourselves and live really essentially what are separate lives? We appear to be together, but are we? Because our ideals and in many respects we are, of course, but our ideals and our belief systems governing our actions are quite separate. So there's space for any and every type of person, and I'm to some extent but to a certain extent, I'm taking a culturally relative perspective. But that only goes so far as well, and we only need to look to extreme examples of that. Like we can't. There has to be a point where we all or most of us agree that this is the way forward, and that's going to require toing and froing, and it's going to require exploration as well, and it's going to require some extremism as well, in which is what we're seeing now in this rise of alpha females as well, and this rise of hyper independence. Like that's another thing that's a fallacy. Like, and men have been doing it for too long as well. Like, we're independent and we do it. No, it's not true. You wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the cooperation of two biological parents that you have, and you wouldn't be here if there wasn't elements of healthy, some form of healthy primary caregiving to some extent. We're relational beings. I keep coming back to this. Like, we're not going to do it on our own. Like the fact that you're sitting on a chair means you have a relationship with a chair. Like, we live in a realm of duality. These are like universal principles. Like, we can't escape them. So cooperation is key, and having very open conversations and being patient. That's another, the practice of patience is massive here. And it's really understated and underestimated because, and compassion as well, compassion in a modern sense, not compassion in its etymological root meaning, which is sort of engrossed in fear and so forth. It's compassion about being very open to other people's ideas and beliefs and postures. And and who we are as people moving forward, and knowing and not coming from fear, not being consistently threatened, which is difficult because I'm not insinuating bypassing our physiology. I'm saying let's feel that, but then let's also be creative in our consciousness, because we have that capacity far greater than we used to look at different options in our lives as we can be with people. So there's space for everything and everyone, and there's going to be a hybrid that comes through where we can find that balance and come together. Ideally, get clear on what you want in life. Really gain clarity on what you want.
So get clear, get clarity, and embrace the hybrid, the new generation that's coming, but also knowing who you are in that societal new norm.
Yeah, we don't have to lose ourselves. We don't. There's cooperation, communication, clarity. Like, it's 3 C's. There you go. Cooperation, communication, clarity. We don't need to lose ourselves. Like men, for the men watching this, you don't, even your alphaness, you don't need to lose yourself. Don't be scared. You can still be an alpha male. You can be strong and grounded and vertical and discerning and still exert power, but not autocratic power, authentic power. That's the key difference.
And that is key, authentic. And I really appreciate that comment. So Beverly has a question for you. And she's asking, how does one's culture affect the perception of alpha male or female? Great question.
Massively. We're deeply, like, it's a great question. And you only need to look to various societies around the world. So, let me just choose one. Let's choose the US, because your viewers are mainly US. But then again, there's so many different subcultures within the US itself. I mean, there's so many, like, deep south, west coast of California, like polar opposites, right? Like worlds apart, yeah. And I don't live in the US. I've visited there many, many times, but I don't live in the US, so I'm not entrenched in the culture. But in saying that, the Western world is driven by culture from the US. But to answer the question simply, massively, culture and our society and societal norms influence the way we behave. Like, look at our education systems. That's culture influencing the way we are taught, the way we are taught to be in this world or do in this world. Look at media, the influence that media has. Look at the influence that corporations have in terms of what we are told we need to be and how we need to live. We live in a consumerism-based society. Look at our socioeconomic models and structures. They promote certain collective values: individualism, independence. These are alpha qualities. Patriarchy, yeah? So again, a very complex question, but to answer it simply, massively. Culture influences the way we behave and think and feel about ourselves massively. That's why we have to begin to be discerning. So if we're looking at masculine and feminine energies, discernment is a masculine energy. Doesn't mean that females don't have it, but this is a time when we have to be discerning now. We have to engage in a masculine energy. And we begin to understand what is actually happening. We have to flux to a state of compassion for ourselves and for what's happening in order to have clarity and peace within ourselves and patience, so we don't panic. That's a feminine quality. So there's this interchange, this constant, this dance between us, within us, and between us, of masculine and feminine energies. And when we abide to that, we realize that we carry this within us. These are just, we call them feminine traits, but men can be compassionate as well. There are thousands of examples throughout history, about hundreds of thousands. We hope so, yeah.
So Diane is asking, do you think alpha females are now raising more beta sons? Interesting question.
Yeah, I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in that process, and emasculation is a massive topic, but in that process, and beta females can emasculate men as well, but they're emasculating their sons as well. So essentially, they're producing exactly what they don't want, creating exactly what they don't want, and that's unhealthy as well. And then again, there's that extreme pendulum swinging again. So and that's a really tough one too, because how do we move through that? my mind is going in 1,000 different places right now, so I'll pause there.
So what I'll see in the therapy world, one of my mentors, Dr. Ken Adams out of Michigan, wrote a book called When He's Married to Mom and Silently Seduced. And some of his premises in that book is, especially if we're looking at two different systems. One is a single mom raising sons, and that may, and I'm talking from an unhealthy standpoint, has had an unhealthy relational dynamic with men. How does that affect her raising a soon-to-be man is one situation that we can look at. And the other one is that when women are in a relationship and they're raising sons, that if there's a disconnect in the relationship and they're committed to being committed, that she can now make that son her partner, which is what we call silently seduced. So she's now emotionally enmeshment, emotionally molesting, so to speak. And how does that affect him growing up? And being a certified sex addiction therapist, I will see that kind of unravel in many different ways, sexually in particular. So, I think it's a very complex conversation. And I 100% agree with you is that we are seeing, and I am a mom of a son, we're seeing more women than ever raising more beta men. And there's many different reasons for that. But I believe one of the things that you said is true is that if we kind of go back versus the collectivism to the individual, that we need to know who we are and understand how did we get to this particular place? What was our relationship in heterosexual relationships? How did we relate with the opposite sex? And how is that affecting us making decisions going forward, as well as with our relationships with our sons and our daughters in particular? And it's going to continue to go because we are, and I do believe this stuff, that as women, we are who we are, our children, especially our boys, we are who their moms make them. So if we're raising them and we're single, we have to kind of find some type of balance to be able to create that energy. But, it's going to be interesting to kind of see what's coming down the pipeline. I'm wondering if you had any other comments about that.
Yeah, it's an expansive conversation, and emotional, psychological, and or physical entanglement or enmeshment is something that so many children deal with their parents, whether it be mother-son, mother-daughter, father-son, father-daughter. It happens across the board. And again, I really want to come back to collaboration and cooperation here. And it's not about blaming and shaming. As a man, though, I'll talk about the role of men in this place. Like, women are doing the best they can with the tools they have as single parents. And fortunately or unfortunately, society favors, and this is in our legal systems as well, like men, I know many men that are fighting so hard to have their children that are separated from their partners, their heterosexual partners, their women in their lives, and they don't have the emotional stability between the partners, and they're just doing this, and they're putting the child in so much, not danger, but it's emotional danger. They're putting the child, they're not prioritizing the child, but they have to fight. The men have to fight so hard to see their children because society has deemed women to be more nurturing or more equipped to be the primary caregiver of a child when there is separation or there's a discontinuity in that union between those two primary caregivers. And that is intrinsically not healthy either. But then we're looking at these men as well, these unhealthy men that are leaving and not being a healthy role model for their children. So women then are doing the best that they can with what they have. And it's a combination of societal pressure and societal constructs, unconscious, implicit norms, normative structures and influences in our society that are dictating how we do what we do, but also not leaving women with much. So they have to be the primary caregiver, the primary economic provider in most cases, okay? And especially in lower socioeconomic demographics. That's another conversation as well.
Absolutely.
They have to nurture their children. They also have to meet their own emotional needs. Well, we're asking a hell of a lot from one person, irrespective of man or woman. We're asking a hell of a lot for one person to be. Now, traditionally meaning from an evolutionary perspective as well, and when we're looking at our tribes and our cultures, we've evolved to, when you're born in a community, every single person in that community is your parent. You are supported. That is the relationship, like your uncle, your aunties, the person down the road, in the next village, in the next hut, whatever it is, not in the next village, the next hut, they are your parent. They're your primary caregiver as well, and you're handed everywhere. You're supported. Now we live in a society where so compartmentalized, we're so segregated. One person is to be all of these things. How can they not the chances are they're going to emasculate, they're going to entangle and enmesh unconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to look at for me, when I work with men, and I work with women as well, but when I work with men, I empower them to be responsible, and I empower them to think laterally, and also, again, longevity, sustainability. Like, what type of people do you want to be? We live in this, so imagine the earth as this web, like a spider's web. And when you tug on one point of that web, that whole web feels the shut. It's like a pebble in the pond. Those ripples are infinite. We don't think like that in society, though. We think, if we're detached, out of sight, out of mind. It doesn't work like that. When as a man, you disconnect from your partner and you have a child and you have nothing to do with that child, and that child doesn't have a healthy masculine presence in their life, you're disrupting the fabric of society. You're contributing to that. And men every single human being has to take ownership and responsibility for that. So it's a loaded question, and we're asking a lot for one person. And again, cooperation, communication, and clarity.
Mm-hmm. And I would say amen to that, Stef. So one of our comments from Big Sci or Clarence is saying that he feels like the man is alpha by creation, and that there are degrees of alpha. So I'm wondering if you had any comments about the degrees of alpha, especially with the new breed of female alphas coming up.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely degrees of alpha. There are degrees of beta. There are degrees of everything in life. I definitely resonate and agree with that. About how deep down the rabbit hole do we want to go with what that looks like, and at what point do we say, oh, you're too little alpha now, you're falling into a category of beta, and how does that help us understand life and relationships a little bit better? It does, but I'm posing the question as to how. So I'm answering the question as, yes, there are degrees. I completely resonate with that. There are layers and degrees to everything, and shades to everything in life. And then putting that question back on individuals to really think about and feel into is, okay, so where do you fall on that spectrum? Can you identify with a set of characteristics and what they mean for you? Really going through that process yourself of educating yourself, and then putting that into practice and embodied practice, and how that plays out in your life, and observing that, being attentive to that, and moving with a deliberate intention, and how that then serves you and serves your relationships. That's how I would respond to that as well. So, find that place where you sit and allow yourself to fluctuate. You don't have to be fixed. Like, I'm consistently adjusting and fluctuating my ideas and my beliefs and my postures and my expressions based on what I value, and based on, hey, maybe I'm doing something that could be done better. Well, I'm going to be open to looking at that because I want to.
Continue to be a work in progress and be committed to you growing. We're all
absolutely. Yeah.
So I have a text message. They didn't want to put the question in the live feed, so I'll honor that. And her comment is about women who have sex the way traditionally men have been said to have sex, like in the hookup culture. What does an alpha male think about a female that he comes in relationship with, that had previously had sex, typically patterned as a masculine trait?
First of all, let's debunk some myths here. Can I swear on this? I've only sworn once, but am I allowed to swear? I didn't ask you that. Good, because I like to swear sometimes. It's just organically, naturally. I better get a fuck out because I gotta get it out. I usually swear a lot more than this. Okay, so here it is. Let's debunk a myth.
Yes.
First and foremost, from a biological perspective, women. So everyone's listening to this. Females want and crave for sexual connection and interaction just as much, if not more, than men.
Yes.
That is something that is biologically innate within women, within all of us. So we want to clear that all up now, because that's very important to understand. So when we're looking at men traditionally, not so much being womanizers, because there's a different connotation to that, but just having sex freely and so forth, which is a basic biological urge and need being met. When women do it in our society, it is deemed as being, you're a slut, or you're acting like a prostitute, or you're acting in a way that is not conducive to being a healthy female. Look at these oppressive, these negative connotations associated with a woman doing that. And again, that is a product of power hierarchy. It's a product of oppression. It's a product of keeping women in check by a masculine or male oppressive dominant hierarchy, patriarchy as an example, okay, without going into too much detail there. So to answer the question, a healthy male will look at that and say and understand, okay, yes, and that's it. That's what a healthy male would, and okay, sure. And a healthy female would look at that in a male and say, okay, and what's the big deal? But ask questions around that, because what is driving that? Is it insecurity and fear and a fear of lack? Is it lowered self-worth that is driving our need to, and we're fulfilling that through sexual interaction that is just meaningless and void? Because but that's another conversation though. That's a psychodynamic emotional conversation. That's an internal conversation. But in terms of women having casual sex, that's a personal choice. I've come from a place personally where I used to do a lot of that. It was meaningless, so to say. It wasn't meaningless. It didn't carry deeper emotional connection. It was purely physical. Nothing wrong with that. I've come to a place within myself now where if I'm engaged in physical sexual activity, I want there to be emotion. I want there to be something of depth and substance at a psychological level, at an intellectual level. And there's so many other variables that I want. I don't just want it to be purely physical and detached in that way. And I never think it completely is, but I want to be very aware of my emotions and my emotional connection in that space. But to answer that question is, and so what? So a woman is meeting her basic biological needs. Okay, cool. Does it align with your values? If it aligns with your values and you can deal with her history and you're not attached to it and you're not taunted by it, then so be it. It is what it is, and it's natural.
And I agree with a lot of things that you said. Coming from a psychoanalytical space, that would be exactly where I go, is that if two people are coming together, you both understand that you have a history. But if you're at that place of character and chemistry and have the same value system, you're going to understand that. And it's about, what does that mean? Because there's this connotation, so to speak, that if someone's had many partners, that they potentially have a more higher propensity to cheat on the relationship. So sometimes people will come from those, as you mentioned, myths and stereotypes. But as you mentioned in your own story, you evolve. So, as an older male, you don't want to be the same way that you were at 18. So maturity also dictates how we are sexually and relationally as well. So I want to share a comment from another male viewers, and I appreciate the male viewers chiming in. So please chime in. So Alex is asking, so what does a balanced and healthy alpha male, alpha female look like? And should everyone strive to reach the alpha status? And what are some of the pros and cons? Several questions there, but what are your general, what would be your general response to that?
So I'll revert back to what I mentioned earlier in those sort of healthy alpha male. For me, what a healthy alpha male, or just healthy masculine characteristics are. Healthy masculine characteristics, which for me, alpha is so I have a model that I've created and a program called sovereign leadership. So for me, it's very important that men in particular, for their own selves, because there's so much unhealthy leadership, so much unhealthy masculine or male leadership in the world, is they step into their sovereign power from a healthy perspective. And this sovereign leadership model has 14 principles, 14 tenets in that model that essentially characteristics, but a little bit more than that. It's a deep dive into what does it mean to be a sovereign leader. So defining alpha characteristics are really around sovereignty and really around stepping into one's own power in a way that is inclusive, in a way that is relatable, in a way that is long-term in thinking and feeling, and is a way that leading from the heart. So asking quality questions of who am I as a human being? How can I serve? What is the meaning of life? Like really simple yet not simple, profound, massive questions. Ramana Maharshi, one of the greatest minds of our time, had one focus: who am I? That's it. And people would come to him and he would just say, go away and ask the question, who am I? And I don't want to see you. That's it. That was his wisdom. One of the greatest minds of our time. Asking this question of who am I is a powerful question leading from the heart, and more men need to do that. Can you repeat some of the other elements of that question as well?
Absolutely. So what does a balanced and healthy alpha male and alpha female look like? Should everyone strive to reach the alpha status? What would be some of the pros and cons of that?
Yeah. So, yes, I do feel everybody should strive to reach an alpha status, and a healthy alpha status, because essentially that's why I mentioned sovereign leadership, because essentially you have an ability to lead self. Pros and cons are going to vary in individuals and different cultures and your own subgroups, like your own peer groups as well. But some cons could be that as you begin to find your own sovereignty and your own authentic power, you're not coming from a place of, again, subjugation or prejudice, That's sort of a caveat there. You're not coming from a place of autocracy. Some of your peer groups may go, whoa, this is not the John I know. This is not the Alex I know. You're scaring me because you're unfamiliar. That makes me uncomfortable. I feel unsafe. See you later. So you may lose peer groups. Are we ever really losing? But you get to redefine yourself and your peer groups as well. That could be a possible con, but it's only temporary. Everything's temporal. Another con could be perhaps that you lose parts of yourself. And I've gone through this process multiple times where you lose. You start redefining your belief systems and your models of reality and the way you shape your world around you and your relationships. And that can be very daunting. It can be very painful. So there's pain associated with that. And the pros are there's an immersion into a new version of self, an emerging of this more authentic self, which feels better. It feels lighter. You feel clearer. You feel liberated. So, feeling liberated and is a quality of the alpha as well, because you're empowered enough to make choices and decisions and be very direct and discerning with who you are and how you want to move through the world. The initial part of alpha and alpha males and alpha females, I don't know if that question was meant together or in parallel. I'm not sure about that. I don't think you're sure about that either.
Yeah,
a bit vague.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, a couple of things that I would summarize. And as we are winding down, hello, Melanie. Melanie's joining us. If you have any last minute questions, you can now be the time to ask. We're going to be winding down here in just a few minutes. A couple of important things that I hear the theme of what you're saying, Stef, and that is that it comes back to your quote of who am I? What's my values? What's my principles? Because one of the things that I will tell the groups that I talk to and that I work with is that you want someone who's actually more going against societal beliefs and stereotypes. You want someone who's more similar with you in values and principles, but they have to have enough differences where they're actually relevant. So continuing the journey, this is going to be a conversation that we're going to continue to have. And I'm going to jump in and ask another question from one of our other male viewers, Jason Jones. Hi, Jason. It was mentioned earlier that alpha females are more compatible with beta men. In that dynamic, are there studies that show that alpha females will ultimately crave the companion of an alpha male at some point? So even though we're talking, I'm going to summarize what I think you're saying, Jason, is that we're talking about the best fit of an alpha female will be with the beta men. But you're asking is in that relationship, will she come to crave or desire an alpha male? What would be some of your thoughts about that, Stef?
Yeah. The answer is yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For a couple of different reasons. One, because of that projection that we project onto others, what we are ourselves, essentially. And two, because we're adhering to some biological normative standards of life, where it's quite natural for women to be attracted to alpha males. Like in the past meaning from an evolutionary perspective, it's healthy that we've evolved to climb these dominance hierarchies, but not just with one culture. So what would happen is that men would literally, even men, but beyond that, our ancestors, which plays a part in who we are today, in the animal kingdom, would either fight to the death or fight to gain the respect of the community or the culture. And that would be also very attractive to the females in that subgroup, in that group, because they would then realize that, this male can protect, this male can provide, this male has social hierarchy and status now as well. So that question about, do women crave that alpha male? Do they search for that at some level? The answer is yes. At some level, absolutely. And then how that plays out, though, in their own relational, intimate, social dynamic, that's another story. That's because, again, there's the complexities of that feed into that, and our own cultural evolution now compared to these biological needs and urges that are very much implicit and unconscious that play a role still influencing the way we behave and think and feel without us actually knowing.
And I'm going to follow up a question, because I imagine the beta men who are watching this broadcast, that's a scary thing. Think that ultimately the best fit for me is an alpha female, but my alpha female will ultimately crave an alpha male. So I have a few comments about a healthy relationship, but I'm wondering, what would you say to that beta male? Because I go back to what you had said earlier in the conversation about defining that, having the conversation, and any relationship is going to continuously need to take work, especially the longer you're together. It's a lot easier in the beginning because it's new and it's fresh, but to constantly reinvent and to constantly grow and have those conversations and have all the healthy dynamics of a relationship is going to be important. So I'm wondering, what would you say to the beta men who are watching that, and that's a potential fear, is that essentially I'm not going to be good enough, is what I'm imagining could be going through a beta male's mind by hearing that statistic.
Yeah, look, that's definitely not true. It's not that anyone's not good enough. It's whether there's a energetic match and alignment, emotional, psychological, relational, social, etc. I think the truth of it is, and maybe that's not the right term to use, but we should all, I don't like that word term should, that's a habit. We all have a capacity to strive for alpha qualities and characteristics. And to be honest, I don't feel that being a beta person is actually healthy in any capacity. I feel that there's a negative connotation associated with beta, like that we're meek in the modern, because meek has two meanings. We're meek in the modern sense of the word, not in the traditional sense of the word. We're meek, we're passive, we're weak, we're withdrawn, we're restricted. These are beta characteristics. We're like, yes, sir, how many bags full, sir? Like, we're very agreeable. And not that being agreeable is a negative trait, but we're hyper agreeable. So that when I think beta, I think these extreme versions of, extreme expressions of these characteristics, and that's not healthy. So what I say to the beta is, this is wonderful. This is wonderful, because now if you have an awareness, you have an opportunity to transform yourself. If you're uncomfortable and if you're insecure, it's telling you something about your expressive characteristics and how you hold yourself and present yourself in the world, which is great. Now you have an awareness. Now you have an opportunity. And I know it's hard and it's fearful and it's confronting, but you have an opportunity to change, to transmute, to transform, to step into more of your power, to be that balance that maybe you wish to be in the world and how you wish to express that. But again, if you're a beta male with an alpha female, again, I'm just wondering if I want to go down this path with what I'm about to say, because it's a long conversation. I don't know if I want to open it up. And maybe we'll leave this for another time. We'll leave that for another time, for another. If you'll have me back, of course. I won't assume another interview or another Facebook Live. I'll leave that, but I'll leave that there.
All right. Well, we are going to wrap it up. And this was a great conversation. And we can continue this conversation all night. But I want to honor your time. I know it's early in the morning over there in Australia, and I'm sure you have many great things to do today. But a couple of things that I hear as a takeaway is that whenever we operate in the extremes, it's not necessarily a healthy thing. It's finding that balance. And to the viewers' comment earlier about the degrees, but I also think about, in the context of relationship, how we feel, and there's an opportunity to learn about essentially ourselves. Because the other person, I always say, is like a mirror. So if we feel insecure and there's something that we're hyper focusing on them, essentially it's about us. So to continue to grow and to learn and to have that, what I always like to say, Stef, is to have that PhD in your own history. Because many times in relationship, we're so focused on learning about the other person when we don't ourselves know who we are. And we're not going to be able to ask for what we need in relationships until we truly understand who we are. So if you had to do that alone, or if you have to take some time in the context of relationship to pull back, we're constantly learning and growing. There's nothing to be ashamed of, no matter where you are in your journey. But you can't do it alone, and to learn and to continue that path is going to be so important. And to continue these conversations is going to be extremely important. So, Stef, could you share a few closing remarks with us? And then if you can also share how our viewers can learn about your programs and follow you and continue the conversation, because I know you have great posts, but where could we also publicly find some of that information?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So closing remarks are maybe just for simplification, communication, cooperation, clarity. So clarity in your own self, communicate what you're feeling, hold continence around that as well. So you can throw another C in there. Maintain continence. In other words, maintain emotional and psychological continence within yourself. So explore the new notions or ways of being that you're exploring. Attain or embody some level of competency, another C, around that and around who you are, and then begin to communicate that. So, that communication, be willing to cooperate with the changes that are happening in society, but also in your own life and with others. Being open to new ideas is really important around this concept around relational dynamics, and being open to redefining that for yourself as well, and having an open channel of communication and compassion for self as well is really important, I feel. And where you can find me on my website, stefsifandos.com, STEFSIFANDOS.com, and social media is the same. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Stef Sifandos. Yeah, it's all the same. Yeah.
But we definitely appreciate your insight and all of the commentary that you have shared, and you've brought this conversation to another level of depth, and we certainly appreciate that. Do you have any upcoming events or anything that we can look out for?
I'm thinking events. In the near term, no. I'm involved in an amazing project. I'm an integral part of. It's massive project. So I'll be in Europe really focusing on that. I'll be doing some speaking in Europe, in Estonia, in Tallinn. At this point, that's all that's planned, and potentially something on the West Coast later on in the year as well. And then in Indonesia as well, I'll be there. But that's a few months away. But it will be all the updates will be on my website and social media, etc. as well. Yeah.
Well, we will continue to follow you, and just want to wish you nothing but blessings as you continue to do what you are called to do. And we hope to see you here live in person soon. So hope that you have a great day, and we look forward to reconnecting with you soon. And if any of our followers are watching, we will also post where you can also follow Stef and his world adventures. So we hope you all have a good night. Thank you so much for joining us.